The History of Poland, Episode 9. The Many Problems of Mieszko II. Hello and welcome back. I feel as though I'm obligated to offer an explanation about my prolonged absence from this podcast. Fortunately, it's quite easy to explain. First, I got married a few weeks ago. Woo! Second, I moved from California to Oregon. Second, woo! Needless to say, both of these events kept me quite busy, and I was unable to find the time to sit down and create any episodes of this podcast. Strangely enough, when you're moving all over the place, it's pretty hard to find a quiet place to sit down and record an episode of a podcast. Who would have thought? But now I'm back, and I've got some big plans for this fall. It'll be Poland like you've never heard it before. Let's start, though, with a bit of a recap. We left off with Bolesław the Brave passing away, leaving a Poland that, at least on paper, looked to be strong, centralized, and able to fend off any challenges from either the Empire or the leaders of the Kievan Rus. Soon, though, we'll find that that's not at all the case. In fact, the rule of Bolesław's son and successor, Mieszko II, was one that was rife with problems. I was reading some older research papers on this era, and one description of this transition from apparent stability to chaos stuck with me. It comes from Henry Joseph Lang, who published a study titled The Fall of the Monarchy of Mieszko II, and which starts off with this paragraph. Quote, less than a decade after Bolesław's coronation, during the reign of his son Mieszko II, Poland ceased to be a monarchy. The royal insignia were sent to the Holy Roman Emperor Conrad II, and Poland became a fief subject to the suzerainty and authority of the empire. This sudden turn of events raises fundamental questions concerning the causes which led to the fall of the monarchy of Mieszko II. End quote. So, to say that Mieszko II's reign had some problems is a bit of an understatement. But before we get to the problems, let's take a step back and figure out who this Mieszko character is. Before his father Bolesław died, he had a few different sons, one of which, importantly, not the eldest, was Mieszko. Mieszko was born in 990 to Bolesław's third wife, Emnilda, a Slavic princess who was looked upon quite favorably by chroniclers of the time. Now, there are two things of importance to note about Mieszko's life before he began to rule Poland in his own right. The first is that when his father Bolesław invaded the Kievan Rus and set up a government in Kiev, as we covered in a previous episode, Mieszko was left behind to run Poland. Of course, he was doing it in his father's name, but the truth is that the distance made it so that Mieszko had an incredible amount of sway over the course of the Polish state. This is a clear indicator that Mieszko held a special place in the eyes of his father, even at a time when his siblings were at least nominally still in the running to inherit parts of the Polish state. The second notable event is a story that comes down to us about Mieszko paying homage to Emperor Henry II. The details are a little sketchy, but it appears that Bolesław sent Mieszko to pay homage to the emperor in some capacity. There are two possible interpretations of this event. The first is that Mieszko had been placed in command of one of the provinces of the Polish state, perhaps Moravia, and he was becoming a vassal of the empire. The second interpretation was that he was just making a personal pledge of fealty to the emperor without changing the legal status of any of the territory of Poland. Regardless of the intent behind the act of fealty, it does continue to point to Mieszko as a key heir of Bolesław. In fact, between these two events, ruling Poland while his father was off conquering and going out of his way to meet with the emperor, it appears that Bolesław was grooming a successor. After all, if you were going to make one of your sons take the throne after you, and were going out of your way to make it a younger son, you'd probably want to do a few different things. You'd want to give them experience running the country and building relationships with nobles. You'd want to give them a taste of international relations and help them get to know foreign rulers. And you'd want them to have some personally loyal military men at their disposal in case the need arises. Oddly enough, that's exactly what Bolesław did for Mieszko. In the same vein, as far as I can tell, there's no mention of him doing the same for any of his other children, and especially not for his eldest son, Bezprym. Bezprym. What a name. There is a non-zero chance that I'm pronouncing it wrong. What can you do? So, Bolesław had plenty of children, but there are three we need to know about: Mieszko, Bezprym, and Otto. Bezprym was the eldest from one of Bolesław's earlier marriages, while Mieszko and Otto were younger siblings born of the same later marriage. Now, there are two ways that an inheritance could have been given after the death of a noble lord without causing suspicion. One was more traditional, one was more politically savvy. Bolesław could have gone in either direction and things would have been smooth. He didn't, though. Silly Bolesław, never learning that succession is the name of the game in dynastic politics. The first option was the traditional Polish method of inheritance. Let's say a father had 3 sons, as Bolesław did. Before he died, he would make it clear that each of his sons would receive an equal portion of his land holdings and would be equal heirs. This system provided a few perks and one really major drawback. The perks included each of the siblings feeling equal to each other, no one getting left out, and possibly even forestalling the need for a dynastic struggle. The drawback pretty much outweighed all of these benefits. It would fragment the realm, turn one single unified Poland into 3 separate Polands. Unfortunately, this would make Poland easy prey for the surrounding nations. If we'll recall, Bolesław was faced with a situation just like this when his father died. However, instead of just rolling with the fragmentation, he united Poland under his banner and kicked out his rival relatives. Perhaps that is why he didn't want to follow this first option. We don't really know. The second option, though, was to give everything to one person, and that one person had better be the eldest son. This was less pleasing to the younger siblings, as they wouldn't get their own lands to rule in their own right, but it would keep Poland unified. Why the eldest son, you ask? Well, it's just the way things were done, especially in the empire, which was having a very strong influence on the development of Polish politics, law, and society at this time. Both of these could have worked. Unfortunately, Bolesław did a mix of both, and technically ended up doing neither of them. What he did was give nothing to Bezprym and Otto, and gave everything to Mieszko, a younger son. It should come as no surprise, then, that Bezprym and Otto were not thrilled about this turn of events. Anyway, Bolesław died. Rest in peace, Bolesław. And Mieszko ascended to the throne. And yes, I did say throne. In the same vein as his father, Mieszko had himself crowned as King of Poland in 1025. Let's take a moment and pause at that, since it's a pretty pivotal moment with what's about to happen. If we go back in time a little bit, we'll recall that Bolesław was good buddies with Emperor Otto III. They hung out together, had a blast, gave each other some gifts, worked towards strengthening ties with each other, exchanged mercenaries. It's a grand old time. It was because of this great relationship that Bolesław was crowned king, something that the sitting emperor would typically want to approve or veto. In many ways, it was the emperor's prerogative to make someone a king or not. Because of their close relationship and similar worldview, Otto had no problem with Bolesław becoming king. However, Mieszko did not have a close relationship with the emperor and went ahead and crowned himself king anyway. By this time, the emperor was Conrad II, and boy was Conrad upset. It wasn't, let's go to war upset, but they were not on good terms. I actually received an email from a listener asking to explain part of this. They were curious about whether Poland was technically part of the Holy Roman Empire or whether they were their own nation. Great question, but unfortunately there isn't an easy and simple way to answer this question. Instead, let's start with 2 different ones. The first is, what was the emperor's role in European politics? The second question, what did it mean to be a part of the Holy Roman Empire? For the first question, there are a few different ways to answer it. First, we could say that he was styled as, quote, Emperor of the Romans and Augustus, which we know because Conrad had it embedded into the side of his crown, which we still have, a crown which I will post a picture of on the website. So, while the Holy Roman Empire was not really a Roman Empire in the sense of the original Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Emperor did want to be viewed as inheriting that power. Even then, Rome held a special place in the minds of the people, as it was the empire that controlled all of Europe for hundreds of years. In that way, the emperor would be able to claim authority over all of Europe. Of course, there was no actual transfer of power from the Roman emperors to the Holy Roman emperors, but that was hardly the point. Another way to answer it would be to describe the emperor in terms of his other titles. While these change over time as the empire expands, shrinks, and the ruling family changes hands, at this point in time there are 3 key titles to keep in mind: King of Germany, King of Italy, and King of Burgundy. Now, before we start to imagine that these are all equal, let's pause. First, the emperor by necessity needed to be the King of Germany. Once he had been elected, he would normally go down to Italy for a bit to become King of Italy and get his authority verified by the Pope, and then head back to Germany to rule. So in some sense, the empire was just what other nations Germany managed to exert authority over. Speaking of the Pope, the emperor was also seen as the chief servant of God on earth. Oddly, this claim was made by both the Pope and the Emperor, but that's a story for another day. In a single sentence, the Emperor had political authority that was based in Germany, but which extended over most of Central Europe, an authority that was bolstered by his religious claims, but which only existed in regions where military force could back up his dictums. Now, for our second question, what did it mean to be a part of the empire? This one is way harder to answer. To begin with, the empire, as we've made clear in past episodes, was not a centralized authority, but was instead made up of smaller states. Then, in addition to that complexity, there were states like Bohemia, which were like appendages of the empire that almost always acted in unison with official imperial policy. Then there were nations like Hungary and Denmark, which went from being allies to enemies to rivals and everything in between, depending on who was in charge of it. Then there was Poland. This is where it gets tricky. Depending on who you ask, Poland should have been a part of the empire in the same sense as Bohemia, it should have been an ally of the empire in the same sense as Denmark, or it should have been a rival to the empire in the same sense as Hungary. Or it was some combination of these things. The truth is, as far as we can call something the truth when there aren't a ton of records, it all depended on who was ruling Poland and who was ruling the empire. If the Polish state was stable, the leader was strong, and they were able to play the game of international politics adequately, then Poland was an independent state. If they were weak and the emperor was strong, then Poland was closer to the empire. It was never a fully fledged part of the empire, key disclaimer, at least not at this era of history, but it was watched like a hawk by the surrounding nations. A great deal of this political ambiguity stems from the fact that there isn't a natural barrier in this area of Europe. France and England have the Channel separating them, Germany and Italy have the Alps, Germany and France have the Rhine, but Poland and Germany are all part of one expanse of land that stretches from northern Germany all the way to the Black Sea and the Urals and Russia. That meant that there wasn't a natural delineation between the two politically, leading to disagreements about their relationship status, if you want to call it that. Anyway, Mieszko crowned himself king without the emperor's permission, which greatly annoyed the emperor. Not the end of the world, but not a great start to the relationship. Things get kicked up a gear when Mieszko expels his two brothers, Otto and Bezprym, from Poland. You don't want rivals to the throne hanging around. Otto heads off to Germany, where he goes to hang out with some relatives and petition Emperor Conrad to intervene in Polish political affairs. Bezprym, meanwhile, heads east and gets to know the ruler of the Kievan Rus, Yaroslav. It's not clear if Mieszko expelled them from the nation because of their plotting against him, or if it was a preemptive move to remove them from the halls of power. But regardless, the brothers were now on the outs. Around this time, Conrad left Germany for Italy, as emperors were wont to do. While he was away, nobles conspired against him, again, as noblemen were wont to do. While these nobles were rebelling against Conrad while he was out of town, they had a great idea. What if they invited Mieszko to come on over with an army, help them overthrow Conrad, and just have a grand old time causing problems? Well, Mieszko thought that was a splendid idea. But unfortunately, he took his time getting ready for war. In fact, he took so long that Conrad was able to come back to Germany, crush the nobles, and then turn his attention to Mieszko just as he was preparing to invade Germany. Mieszko still invaded. There was a bit of back and forth, with both sides gaining the upper hand at certain moments, and then things started to really heat up in 1030. This was the year that Mieszko secured an alliance with Stephen I, the king of Hungary. Coordinating their armies, Stephen invaded the empire along with Mieszko, knocking Conrad back on his heels. This was a bold strategic move, since it would spread out Conrad's forces and help cause general unrest in the empire as the war occupied more of the emperor's attention. Divide and conquer, something along those lines, it was going to work. But it didn't, because, not to be outdone, Conrad then took things to a whole other level entirely. You see, in the background of all of this were Mieszko's two brothers, both pushing their hosts, Conrad in Germany and Yaroslav in Kiev, to crush Mieszko. It was this fact, combined with Conrad's entreaties, that led Yaroslav to lead a Kievan invasion of Poland. According to the primary chronicle, quote, Yaroslav collected a large force and marched into Poland. They recaptured the cities of Czerwin and ravaged the Polish countryside. They also captured many Poles and distributed them as colonists in various districts. Yaroslav relocated his captives along the Rus, where they live to this day. End quote. Riding alongside Yaroslav was Mieszko's brother Bezprym, who then proceeded to stir unrest and rebellion in the Polish lands with hopes of unseating Mieszko. So, needless to say, things were not going well for Mieszko. And then they got worse. In fact, it went so poorly that while Mieszko was able to sue for peace with the empire, he was swiftly overthrown by Bezprym. In the words of Adam Zamoyski, Mieszko is then best described as, quote, the unfortunate man. You see, Mieszko had to flee Poland and decided that his best bet was to head to Bohemia. That was a mistake. As Gallus tells us, quote, it is also said that he was treacherously seized at a parley by the Czechs and had straps tied around his genitals to prevent him from procreating, for his father King Bolesław had done them a like injury when he blinded their duke, who was his uncle. End quote. In simpler terms, Mieszko fled, was castrated, and left to rot in a cell for a while. While he was gone, his brother Bezprym was busy killing people. Yes, in that ancient tradition of cleaning house after you've taken power, Bezprym began exiling, imprisoning, and executing people in Poland who he saw as a threat to his rule. And, in a similarly ancient tradition, those people began to fear for their lives and ended up killing Bezprym after only a few months in power. This then led to an interesting turn of events. Under a confusing set of circumstances, Mieszko was released from prison and was able to return to Poland. Not learning his lesson, he found himself in another war with Conrad and was swiftly crushed. So crushed that as part of the Treaty of Merseburg that ended the conflict, he was forced to renounce his title as king and split the territory of Poland in three. While it's not clear who received which parts, we know that Otto received one portion, Mieszko another portion, and a third relative, possibly a cousin, received another portion. Everyone returned to their corners to go back to the business of ruling their nations. Then, Otto died at the hands of one of his own men. Mieszko saw this as an opportunity. Mieszko then seized this opportunity by taking over Otto's territory. Then, without knowing the details, we do know that Mieszko was able to either depose his cousin or prevent him from reaching his territory, meaning that Mieszko is once again the sole ruler of Poland. What a roller coaster this guy's life is. Sadly, this harmony wasn't going to last for very long. While Mieszko was able to reunite Poland under his banner in 1033 and was able to continue to call himself king, despite renouncing it at Merseburg for the rest of his life was ended shortly thereafter. While some sources say it was a natural death and others say it was an assassination, the simple fact is that Mieszko died in 1034, leaving his son Casimir as the heir to the throne. Now, before we get to Casimir, let's just recap the last few decades of Polish history. It has been converted forcibly to Christianity by its rulers as part of a political decision. It's been at constant war with Germany, Bohemia, surrounding pagans, and the Kievan Rus. Its people have had their way of life turned upside down over and over again. Their country was briefly split into 3 parts, and now their ruler has died. Needless to say, many people in Poland were pretty upset about the way things have been going. So upset that they're about to riot. Not just riot, but like super riot. In the words of the Primary Chronicle, quote, "There was a revolt in the Polish country. The people arose and killed the bishops, the priests, and the boyars, and there was rebellion among them." End quote. It's a time that Gallus laments as he tells us that Poland's, quote, "own inhabitants were doing even more senseless and ghastly things to her than the neighboring nations they had been at war with." Yes, next week we'll be jumping into something that is dramatically called the pagan reaction. It's a time period where Poland essentially sets itself on fire. Tune in next week to find out all about it. In the meantime, if you'd like to go deeper on this week's episode, there are some extra resources on the website at historyofpolandpodcast.com. I'll put a link in the show notes so it's easier to get to. Thanks a bunch. I'll see you next week.